Hello, a rather long video today. This is going to be a walkthrough of some of the techniques I used making a chess set, and here it's just showing me taking some silver out of the pickle, which is a acidic substance when hot, so I've got it in a hot pot there, and next to that is a little ultrasonic cleaning machine, which I'm just dropping these bases for some of the chess pieces into. The pickle's quite tame really. We used to use sulfuric acid back in the day, but you still probably don't want to rub it into any cuts, which I noticed when I'm filing these up here. Just filing these round. I've soldered different bits together, obviously, silver, in the creation of this chess set. And here I'm just trying to work out what height a bishop should be. Obviously it should be a little bit shorter than a queen or a king, but it needs to be taller than a pawn. And just taking a measurement there so that I can get both sides the same, cutting them with a fret saw. This is 3mm round wire that I'm using here, so it's got a bit of weight to it and it's fairly sturdy, so it shouldn't get bent out of shape. And when you're doing this sort of thing, to try and cut a piece of wire and get it so that it's absolutely flat is not the easiest thing in the world, but it's doable. And I noticed that this has got a slight bow to it, so I'm just trying to get that nice and straight. There's a level of accuracy which needs to be used when making pieces of jewellery, and it would be nice to apply that same level of accuracy to this chess set. But the fact that there's so much work in a chess set and so many pieces means that if you really got every piece absolutely accurate, it would take a very long time indeed. So there's a certain amount of that will do that we use, or I use anyway. You want to get it pretty close, but a handmade chess set, 32 pieces, you're maybe going to find one or two not absolutely straight or absolutely perfect. That's kind of the nature of handmade work. Here I'm just cutting out a collet that I've made for the top of the bishop. I'm cutting claws into it. This is a similar skill that would be used in making a diamond solitaire ring, although no one really does this anymore. Most people will buy a collet ready-made, cast, and it will be the right size for the stone and happy days. The high-end bespoke jewellers will make a collet correct for the stone that they've got, especially with bigger stones. Also, a high-class jewellers is going to have a set of mills, so the jeweller's going to be able to make any piece of silver any size that he wants, or she wants. And here I've just purchased 1 mil sheet, and everything's coming out of that really, so it means I haven't got quite so much scope for getting everything as I would like it. See here, I'm just piercing out from this collet. A collet is a cup that holds a stone, if you don't know, and it tends to tilt under the stone, so it will be bigger at the top and smaller at the bottom, And in order to get that angle to the sides, you need to bend a piece of silver into a kind of rainbow shape, and then bend it in the opposite direction, on the opposite axis, so that it turns into a round kind of cup. And it needs to be soldered up nice and solidly and banged round, and if you weren't quite accurate, you'll find that it's leaning to one side. Here I'm just soldering this onto the base, and I've got this little stand called a third hand, which I'm using to hold it. This way you can actually look all the way around the piece, make sure that it's nice and straight. And I'm soldering it here with a oxygen and gas torch, picking up the solder with a little titanium probe so that I can drop it in the right place. Now this is how I started off soldering this, and is probably the way to do it. And in the end I chose a different technique, which was simply to put the piece of solder on top of the base, hold the piece that I want to solder to it in a pair of tweezers, and hold it in position, and then heat it up with the other hand, which works, but there's a little bit of guesswork as to whether it's straight or not, and most of them are fairly straight, but there's one or two not quite accurate. This is probably the slower but better way. Here I'm melting some silver down in a crucible, and on the left at the bottom you can see a silver ring which is full up with compressed sand, and that sand I used some standard wooden chess pieces to make the imprint of the knight's head. To carve a knight is not easy in wood, there's not that many people capable of doing it, and to copy it in silver is possible, but just adding some flux there to make sure the silver flows nicely. To take a cast from a wooden piece seemed to be the sensible thing in the construction of the knights. So I'm going to get the silver nice and hot, and even when it's all nice and liquid, keep applying the heat. You want it hot enough that you can pour it into the mould in one go, so that it forms the imprint that was made in the sand, and get it near the edge, then pour it straight in, and it should solidify. And it's quite a fierce flame I've got there that I'm putting out, and the metal's still glowing red, and I chuck it outside just so I don't set fire to anything, and just parting the mould. It splits apart into two chunks, and it pops out. You can see it's still plenty hot. Dropped it in some water to cool it off, and the sand's still smoking away. It's a special sand called Delft clay, and they impregnate it with an oil, and the oil helps it to hold its shape and act as a mould. So that's the horse's head from one of these, and I need to cut off where I poured the material in, which is actually where his mouth would be. So a chunky bit of silver to saw through. Quite possible to break some saw blades in the process. And then I'm just drilling some holes in the eyes. These are the knights from the other side. These are the white knights. The white knights I've used round wire. The black knights I've used square wire, and the heads of the black knights are somewhat squarer and a bit chunkier than the white side from two different chess sets. The reason I'm drilling holes here is because I've decided I'm going to set some stones in the eyes of these knights. I'm not a stone setter. I have rather limited experience of setting stones. This chest set, there were 32 pieces and a total of 36 stones that I set. Some more successfully than others. There's a couple of CZs in my white rooks which are a little bit loose. They rattle around a little bit, but they are secured enough that they're not going to fall out. And I just made the collets for them slightly too big, so here I'm soldering the black knights, the square wire to the reverse of the head. Not that easy to get it perfectly aligned so that it contacts everywhere. And the head of these knights has got a fairly large mass to it. It takes quite a lot of heat. Kind of sucks the heat away from the flame, but you can see I've got a decent flame here. And I'm just trying to load it up with enough solder that it's a nice strong join. Obviously if you drop one of these pieces you don't want it to fall into pieces. And a solder join is, when it's done properly, is quite strong. Sometimes it looks like it's soldered though, and when you apply some force it just snaps off, where there's been oxidisation between the two pieces of metal and it hasn't really soldered properly. So this is the white royalty pieces: the rook, the knight, bishop, the queen, the king, bishop, knight and rook, and they're all set with stones. So that's my first experience really setting. These need polishing still. We come to that at the end. And they've got a bit of weight in them, these pieces. I did a silver chest set before where I used wire, and I found that they were a little bit on the fragile side, a little bit tricky to clean up because they weren't so solid, and you couldn't polish inside them because they were built kind of like cages. And this one is my second chest set that I've made, so doing it a different style. Here I'm just sawing off a thin piece of sheet. I think probably about 8mm wide, maybe more. And I'm filing the sides so that there's no saw marks. And this is going to be the base of something. I've got quite a collection of clips here, so I'm not sure exactly what this is going to be the base of. This might be the base of... Yep, this is going to be the base of a rook or a knight. They were both done the same way. This being slightly wider, I think, is the rook. The knights and the bases have got slightly lower profiles. And so what I'm doing here, I'm scoring a line into the metal using my fret saw. This is so that when I try and file a groove in it, the file doesn't move around, it goes where I want it to. And this is to turn up a kind of square shape for the bottom. If I didn't put these grooves in, the metal wouldn't want to fold in a nice sharp corner. So I'm probably rooting around for a file at the moment. Yep, it's a file. It's a three-sided file, triangular file, and just got to gradually cut a groove in. Once you've got a nice groove, the file's just going to stay in that groove and hopefully not slide around. I want to cut about 3/4 of the way through this material I start off with the three-sided file, and then I go to a square file because it's got to go to 90 degrees. These things tend to have a great deal of working and then looking at what you're doing and making sure that it's as it should be. And this, I'm just running solder down the groove after I've folded it. Obviously there's a cut running into the material a bit, and I'm just running solder down to make it solid again. And you see I've put a couple of corners in it, nice and square, and then I just have to cut the front and solder it into a continuous square, just picking up solder and running it in that other join. And when you solder on silver, it turns black, and then you have to, that's what that acid's for, to take the black away. Here I'm just making sure it's nice and flat. I've got this little mini anvil. It's useful because it's got round bits and square bits, and you can tap stuff to the correct shape on it. Doesn't need a lot of work, because I'm going to file it up anyway. Start off with a nice coarse file that takes off quite a lot of material. Trying to get the squares the sides of this square, and where I've soldered it, there's solder which needs removing, and once it's nice and flat using this file, then you use a buff paper or finer file to get it smoother still. These are bases for pawns, I believe, round. The white pieces are all round and the black pieces are square in nature. It's obviously much quicker to do the round pieces because I have various different things which you would use to make rings, and so you can tap it round. It's called I've got several triplets. A round shaft of metal which gets thicker towards one end and is thinner towards the other, and you can slide anything circular over the top of it and tap it, and when you tap it, it becomes perfectly round, and you can even stretch it if you want to make it bigger. If you want to make it smaller, you have to cut through it and solder it smaller. Although for plain things like bands, there are tools that you can get which will squeeze them down. These square bases, I think, are probably rooks. After making the square piece, as you saw before, soldered it to a round base, and then cut a square of material which I solder on the top. It overhangs the sides, which is handy because you can put the solder on the bit that overhangs, and once it's all soldered up, you can use the file to take the excess material away. Quite a time consuming process when you have to do it multiple times for different pieces. There's quite a few man hours in this chest set, and it didn't all go perfect straight away. There were some troublesome bits where things were not straight, for instance, and I decided I'd have to unsolder it and then resolder it in a better position. There were a few bits where I thought, oh, I can just tweak that with a pair of pliers to make it straight, and I snapped various bits off, and there were some trials and tribulations, but generally a straightforward process, and you could always start again if a piece went badly. I don't think I did have to start again on any, but so we're 20 minutes in, and basically showing quite a lot of filing and some soldering and a little bit of cutting. And the main things that I had to do. There were a few other techniques though. Obviously the casting, that was just for the night, so I didn't cast anything else. Casting's good because you can take a shape you've already got, but this is a piece of metal that I'm going to anneal. Annealing is the process of getting the silver hot. It kind of resets the molecular construction of the silver. When you've hammered and you've bent silver, it becomes hard. It's called work hardening. With a material like steel, you can heat harden, but the precious metals, when you hit them or you bend them, the molecules end up getting kind of tucked together tighter than normal, and you need to apply heat to get them to relax again, and that makes the material workable again. Now that piece of material that I was heating up was a rainbow shape like I was describing before, and this looks like I'm making a collet of quite a large size, so this is going to be the king, I believe. Just soldering the collet shut. A long time since I made collets. I made collets when I was an apprentice. I was about 16 years old at the time, and that was 27 years ago. And this is a collet punch. I'm using the side of the hammer because I don't want to dent the end of the hammer. These hammers are quite expensive, polished at the ends because it doesn't want to transfer marks on, and that's just the unset, but I've just laid the stones in where they're going to go just to see roughly what they're going to look like. A king and a queen. And this is a process known as doming. The block has kind of half spheres cut out of it, and I've got a range of different punches, different sizes, ball punches, and you just tap the material and it makes it domed. And I thought for the round pieces it was quite a good idea to have some domes. The advantage of dome is it gives it a bit more form. It also gives a bit of height without adding any extra material. And this is showing the Delft clay. You pack it into the mould, hammer it down so it's nice and condensed, and that gives it some solidity in a way. Once it's nice and solid, it will take the impression that you push into it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just filling this mould up, scraping off the excess, and just lining up piece of wood which has got the face of a horse in it, and you kind of have to judge how the silver's going to flow into it. With this sand, you can't do certain shapes. You can't have overhangs because the silver won't flow around the corners. Anyway, push the piece in and then cut a channel for this silver to run through, and this is casting the white knight. In the material goes. Then is to turn off the torch, and this is a wire brush on a dentist drill, just cleaning up the face there. This is back to some sort of collet thing. These collets, who knows what they're for. These might be the bishop collets that you saw me cutting claws out of earlier. Maybe these clips aren't all in exactly the chronological order. Didn't really have any set order of doing anything. I just did it as I felt like it. I did buy some little straight collets to rub over set the stones in the pawns, because there were 8 of them. I wanted them all to be exactly the same, and so buying these silver collets was more sensible. But they delivered 4 of them, and then I had to wait about a month for the other 4 to arrive. So I'm just fluxing the joins there in these collets and soldering them shut, and I have a collet punch which you can hammer them into to make sure they're perfectly round. But if you haven't got a nice strong solder join, it will snap the collet open, and when you snap the collet open, you have to saw through the hole and get the sides to line up again. It takes quite a lot of force to close the collet using pliers with some round tips to them. I find a bit of heat helps as well with the forming of collets. So after I solder them, I stick them straight into this and tap them while they're still hot. Kind of makes the material more malleable. Here I've got a stone on the end of a bit of blue tack, and I'm just measuring up to see whether they're going to be the right size. If they're going to be too big, you can cut a piece out, make them smaller. If they're going to be too small, you can just tap them and they end up stretching a bit. This is maybe the base for a bishop. When you buy the material silver from a bullion dealer in Hatton Gardens, you get charged 20% VAT, which is most unpleasant. And then you work on the material and you produce quite a quantity of waste. All the filing and the cutting, you end up with lots of silver dust. This is just cutting in a groove for the stone to sit in on the pawns. They're those round collets that I was talking about. They're pretty much finished, but I've just got drill attachment there, exactly the same size as the stone, and I'm using that just to open up the end very slightly so the stone can pop into it. And this is beeswax. You use the beeswax to keep the end of the drill bit cool. Silver is a very good conductor of heat as well. It gets hot when you're holding it. Sometimes you burn your fingers as the friction creates heat. As I was saying, you end up with lots of waste material. So I've got a jar full of silver filings and dust, which I need to get melted down. But the price that you pay for the processed metal is higher than spot price, so then you pay VAT on it, and you turn this material into scrap, which they pay less than the melt price for. The spot price is slightly higher than they'll buy it back off you for. So there is a cost to all this, and this is me just setting the stones in these pawns and then cleaning up the outside of the collet with a buff stick. Just checking that the stone can't move there. Sometimes you find it's able to spin around where you haven't put the material down firmly enough around the stone. And yeah, I'm just trying to secure it a little bit more. To put the force goes through your hand into the tool, and you kind of wriggle it around, and it pushes the material down around the stone. So this is a little bit of woodwork I'm doing, just making a box for this chest set, and maybe this is why the pieces were away for hallmarking. Decided I'm going to cut some dovetails so the box is nice and secure, using black walnut and ash. When I made my chest set before, I used black walnut and American maple, and just offering this up to see whether I've cut these at the right angle. I kind of like the idea of the woods being two different colours, like you've got two different colours, chessmen and a checkerboard pattern. So you have the white wood interweaving the black wood. It just seems to be part of the theme. Although someone who's into furniture said, "Oh, you should never be able to see the dovetails in the end panel." Basically meaning that I should have used black walnut for the sides of the drawers, or done a hidden dovetail. But a hidden dovetail is probably a level of skill beyond mine. I'm not a woodworker, but these things are fairly simple compared with jewellery. Jewellery, everything's on a very small scale and has to be very accurate, and when you're dealing with wood, it's a bigger scale. It doesn't need to be quite as accurate. I'm sandwiching the piece of wood jaws of the vice there, and I'm using my jeweler's tools to cut the dovetails. Nice thin blades, and you can turn and go in multiple directions with these thin blades, so that's good. I'm just cutting these dovetail pieces out so that the other side can slide into them. And once you cut everything out, you hope that it's going to be fairly tight. and you can always take it back a little bit to, if it's too tight, see where the wood touch is, and fill it out, or use a chisel to take a little bit off. And as well as making the box from wood, I'm going to use copper and brass to make the chessboard on the top. And the reason I did this in copper and brass, I thought about laying it into wood, but that would make the box deeper, and I didn't want the box to be too big. I wanted it to be as close to the size of the board as possible, and it's got some weight to it. Got little feet on the bottom as well. Three kind of wedge shapes, and the other piece of wood got two kind of wedges which slot into it. I glued these down with a metal glue, epoxy glue, and you can see some of the glue has made a mess there, but that's alright. I was going to sand this back and then polish it. I've glued these dovetails, so it's being held in place by the outside of the box, and I've got these brass fitments there which have got a piece that you can hold to like a drawer handle, and there we go. That's the board's been polished up a bit there, and they're the dovetails, which quite nice and snug, quite strong as well, quite sturdy this. And my idea is to line the box with various things so that each piece has its own place that it can sit. And I'm making these little brass things to hold the pieces so they can't slide around in the box. And they're the black pawns, not yet set with onyxes. Onyx can't take heat or ultrasonic vibrations very well. They're brittle stones, they can crack. So it's going to be the last job to put those onyxes in. Make sure that everything's all good first. Here I'm making square collets for the top of the bishops, and I'm not sure I've ever made square collets, so made in the same way that I made those bases, and these are the tops of the black rooks. They're going to take nice large black square CZs. I did order square onyxes, but they didn't turn up from India, so in the end I ordered CZ, and the CZ's better because I can put it in the ultrasonic if I need to. Not too expensive either, but they do the job they're supposed to. These rook heads are made kind of L-shaped wire by cutting a groove in a thin piece of metal and bending it into an L shape, and then I gave it a little bit of shape so that it was thicker at the top than the bottom, and I cut into sheet metal some L-shape holes with a slightly thicker saw blade than I would normally use, the same thickness as the material that I had made L-shaped, and then I could drop them in and solder them, and they're like bore V-claws, and that's good because I can drop the stone in there. Just checking how far down it drops. I can cut a square hole out of the back of the piece of sheet material, and the bigger the hole, the further down the stone drops, and the smaller the stone, the higher up it sits. So once I've got them as I want them, I'm going to solder these heads onto the base of the rooks before I set the stones. I was thinking, how do you set the stones? You have to take the claw down to the correct height, and then I put a V-shaped cut in the top so that I could just bend it around the stones. This is me doing some polishing on the white pawns. They've come back from hallmarking. I was a little bit disappointed that the hallmarks are quite small. I thought they might be big enough to see with the eye, and they've put them in all different various positions. Hallmarking cost me £100. They're Platinum Jubilee hallmarks. They've got an extra mark there celebrating the 70th year of Queen Elizabeth's reign. So they're a kind of commemorative hallmark, and I'm just using this cutting compound to try and get these pawns polished. Polished them before I sent them for hallmarking, but felt they needed a bit more polishing. Polishing's a really dirty job, and it's not ideal using a Dremel tool. You normally have a bench mounted motor which sucks some of the debris away, and you get a much better shine on these big mops. A mop like that would be maybe 6 inches across on a bench mounted motor, so you've got a lot more surface area, and it goes at a nice high speed, and you get a real nice buff on silver. Using the Dremel or a dentist drill in this case, you haven't got a lot of surface area, so you have to keep applying the polish to the end of the mop, and it doesn't buff it up quite as well. But the fact that they were pre-polished, they only need a bit of a touch. This is a felt mop with some rouge on it. I can get this into a few places that I couldn't get to with other attachments. Trying to buff up these knights, and the jeweler's rouge is the best thing to use on silver to get a nice shine, but it leaves a residue which needs cleaning off, so it doesn't look amazing when it's covered in all the jeweler's rouge. But then you can use the ultrasonic cleaning machine to take the rouge off. One problem though with the ultrasonic cleaning machine is these pieces are, the bases, as you've seen, I've made them hollow, and so they fill up with liquid. They will dry out, but you don't really want them full of water. the muck gets all over your hands as well. So if you've ever met a polisher, their hands are usually dirty. And that's almost finished now, so I will show you the entire chest set as it came up. Okay, so here we have the board. Puts perspex on the top of it, and that's the little handle. My initials and the date on the inside, and there are all the pieces sitting in their own places. I've used the chemical to oxidize the bottoms of the black pieces. I'll put a felt on the bottom of the pieces as well, so they can slide around the board nicely. The board is probably slightly too small for the pieces, because you want to be able to slide the royalty between the pawns, is the general rule. But it looks okay, that's the main thing. And it's a nice item, isn't it? It's a good looking chest set, and they're all hallmarked with my initials. I registered a hallmark before I started this, and it's a unique thing as well. It's one of the rooks there. They're the bishops with those square collets. They hold the stones quite nicely, and one of the knights with black CZs in the eyes. Thanks for watching.